Good morning. We are so glad that you are checking out West this morning. We have a very special guest with us, Stan Moore. And in a few minutes, you're going to hear more about Stan. He is, well, actually, right now, you're going to hear about Stan. Stan, what's your title?
I'm the school director for basic law enforcement training at Central Piedmont Community College, which, in layman's terms, I'm the school director over a police academy in Charlotte.
So I think in the time and season that we are living in, and as we are raising awareness about what it means to exist in love and justice and caring for our black friends, we are going to hear from Stan about police officers, and we're going to talk about the hard topics about police reform and defunding police and those kinds of things. And I want you to hear what Stan and the leaders at CPCC do. I had the opportunity of being on a panel and during one of their final interviews, and I would never be able to be a police officer. It is a really, I wouldn't, and you know that. I wouldn't, it's a really rigorous process. And I know as there are so many feelings of just pain and sadness and anger right now. I wanted us also to pay respect to law enforcement, because I think what you do, and I know lots of the West people feel like what you do is so admirable, and it's a scary time right now. And so we're going to talk about that this morning. If you are new to the West community, we are grateful that you are choosing to spend your time with us this morning. Text the number that you see on the screen. Text the word welcome. We have a gift that we have for you. We also want to let you know that we are going to begin offering something new next week. It's called Voice It, and it's 4 generations of people and different perspectives, challenging topics, and no filter. And we want your feedback about those topics. And so one of the first ones that we're going to be doing is the LGBTQIA community and what justice looks like within that community and with all people. And so we want to know what you want us to talk about. So you'll be seeing that on social media and getting an email about that this week. Stan let me come and be on the last panel that interviewed the cadets. And so last summer, I was driving on Highway 73 in Huntersville, and it was really early on a Saturday morning, and all of a sudden I see some blue lights behind me, and I totally was not speeding, and I had not ran a red light or a yellow light, so I could not figure out for the life of me what I'd done wrong. And so this very nice gentleman walks up to my car and says, "Miss," and I'm so addled. He's like, "Miss, do you know what you did?" And I'm like, "No." And so we engaged in dialogue. I apparently made an illegal U-turn. And he's like, "You look familiar. Do I know you?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know. Do I know you?" And he's like, "Your voice." He's like, "Do you know Stan Moore?" I'm like, "Yes. Yes, I do know Stan Moore." And he was one of the people that we interviewed that day. And so I appreciated his kindness during my citation. But when I saw blue lights that day, I felt like this very next song that you were getting ready to see and listen to. So take a listen.
Is it for me?
It's for everyone. It's called Amazon Echo.
What does it do?
Alexa, what do you do?
I can play music, answer questions, get the news and weather, create to-do lists, and much more.
Echo is pretty neat because it knows all sorts of things. All you have to do is ask.
Alexa, how tall is Mount Everest?
Mount Everest's height is 29,029 feet, 8,848 meters.
How can it know so much? It's so small.
It updates using the cloud. That's also how it gets its answers.
Just read that off the box, huh?
So this morning, if you are worshiping with us, we are in a message series called Questions Alexa Can't Answer. And right now, honestly, there are so many different questions around the state of unrest and injustice in our world. I don't even have one question to whittle it down to. We do want to know that you're with us, so if you will enter your name in the chat room, we actually are giving away a free Alexa every week, and we'll let you know at the end of worship today. But let us know that you're here with your name in the chat room. Also, immediately following our last song, there's going to be like a 30-second video, and then we're going to have a talk back, and you can ask Stan some questions. So, and me, but really Stan. And so if, as you're listening to us this morning, if you have questions that you have around this topic, I invite you to type them in the chat room, or in a few minutes when we do the talk back live, you can type your questions then as well. So we're going to dive right in this morning. Stan, just tell us about yourself, tell us about your background, who you are, and what you do.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here this morning. First and foremost, I thank God for being here. I want to wish all the fathers happy Father's Day, those that mentor our youth along with the people that are actually parents. I wish you a happy Father's Day. My name is Stanley Moore. I was born and raised here in Iredell County in Mooresville. Grew up in the Mooresville area. Went on to become a military police officer in the military. From there, I got off of active duty and became a police officer in the civilian world here in North Carolina. I became a police instructor in 1994. And then from there, I went on to become a director of basic law enforcement training at Central Piedmont Community College. So currently I do both. I'm a part-time police officer still, and I am the director over basic law enforcement training at Central Piedmont Community College. And currently divorced, but with no kids, but I do have the opportunity to, like I say, mentor and counsel a lot of my nieces and nephews. They're like my own kids at times, so that's a very interesting aspect of my life.
I didn't realize you were still in active duty part-time and teaching. That's a lot.
Yes, still doing it. It's hard to get away from law enforcement altogether where you're actively participating in it and just become basically just an instructor. A lot of my instructors are active police officers, and they instruct within the BLET as well.
You know, that strikes me as really important because, like, in preacher school, one of the things that I found, like, especially when I was working on my doctorate, the most effective professors were the ones who were still actively at work in a local church, not necessarily being a pastor, but, you know, leading in some capacity. And the ones that, you know, just were sitting in their offices, they were so far removed from the challenges of the current church. I would imagine that's true in law enforcement as well.
Yeah, it's very true in law enforcement. A lot of times you'll talk to a chief of a law enforcement agency, and they'll tell you that first and foremost they're a law enforcement officer, so they're in a higher administrative position, but they still want to go out and do the same thing that the officers do. It's the same with me as a school director. A lot of my officers, even retired officers that remain active with a police agency and stuff, they want to be involved in this and continue to help and mentor up-and-coming police officers, as well as be a part of the community and what the community is doing, the connection between community and law enforcement.
Right. Did you always want to be a police officer?
No, I did not. And that's one of the things that strikes people as very strange. Growing up, I never wanted to be a police officer, didn't really care for police. Don't hold that against me. You know, it's just the nature of the beast in the area that I grew up in. And then I went to the military, and one of the choices I had was military police officer. I thought that would be really cool to try, so I signed up as a military police officer. Once I got in there as a military police officer, I started to understand a lot about law enforcement, about policing and how they could be effective in the community and make an impact on the community. So I loved it for the 8 years that I did as a law enforcement or a military police officer, so much that, you know, it made me want to get out and continue my law enforcement career as a civilian law enforcement officer. So I went through a BLET, which is the same thing that I'm director over.
What do those letters stand for?
The letters stand for Basic Law Enforcement Training,
Okay.
and there are quite a few of those throughout the state of North Carolina.
Okay. Speak for just a moment. You said you never wanted to be a law enforcement officer because you didn't like law enforcement officers, and that's the nature of the beast, and because of the area that you grew up in. Will you talk about that for a few minutes?
Yeah, and growing up, you know, we learned that law enforcement wasn't in favor of African Americans. I'll just put it out there that way. And it kind of turned me against law enforcement. Some of the things that I saw growing up, I've got tickets when I were younger and stuff, and these were tickets that I thought could have been more of a warning. Were pulled over for different reasons, always attributed it to me being African American. So growing up and being around that social environment where law enforcement wasn't that well received, it kind of made an influence on me and my life. So going into the military, I could have made several different choices. It was just by circumstances that I decided to go with the military police. But to this day, it's one of the best decisions that I've ever made in my life because of the change it made in my life and the better understanding of law enforcement that I received. And even going forward, not to harp on this for a long time, but I know there was racial profiling back then. I know there still is. Even after I became a police officer, I was racially profiled. Maybe not knowing who I was, the officers that pulled me over for whatever reasons, I recognized it for what it was. So I know it's an issue, and it's something that needs to be worked on, but I did experience that growing up, and it kind of turned me against law enforcement as a kid and going into my teen and early adult years.
Well, the cadet that pulled me over in Huntersville, I was impressed with the way he handled himself when he was giving me the ticket or whatever. But I remembered him from the class because he was so articulate, so well spoken. He was African American or a black man, and he talked about what it would be like to be a black man serving in law enforcement that day. And so, because this is talking about police safety, police reform, defunding police, all those issues, but it also is tied to racism and the injustice against, and I still don't know, I mean, African American or black, what do you prefer me to say? Which term?
Well, for me, it's, I prefer African American, but you're going to see that it's, different people take it different ways. Black, I don't have a problem with. As far as African American, I definitely prefer that.
Okay.
As opposed to, some people say people of color, which can be offensive to
Okay.
others. So it's kind of one of those things where it's just, you don't know exactly how to approach it. I think the safest way is always African American. Even in training my cadets, that's what I tell them to.
Okay, well, that's the term I'm going to use then today. The gentleman that pulled me was African American. I was struck by his professionalism that day, but I want to be really frank. I totally smooth talked my way out of a ticket that day. I mean, you know, he gave me a warning, and I mean, I would imagine, because he was so professional, that he would give everybody in that setting.
Right.
I mean, because I really was clueless that there was a no U-turn. I mean, I just had no idea. But, you know, other people would not be afforded that same luxury that I had. African Americans would not be afforded that same luxury. I mean, in lots of circumstances. And white privilege is a real thing. And so I'm owning that, and I own it that day. I mean, it's because of who I knew. Maybe not my skin color, but it is because of, I mean, he knew me from you. And I was all about cashing the Stan Moore card. I didn't want a ticket that day. So West is being really intentional as a church about talking about white privilege, and we're white people. So we're all wrestling with it, and I've gotten several emails after Donna spoke with us last week from folks saying, you know, I never knew that I had bias. I've always thought I wasn't a prejudiced person, but now I see that there is such a thing, and we're going to talk about it in a few minutes, as implicit bias.
Right.
And so I just wanted to tell you, our listening and watching community, thank you for your willingness to continue to look at these topics and wrestle with them, because it is a season and a time to have change. And if we just talk about it once and then let it go, there's not going to be any change, any lasting change. So tell us about the BLET training. How do y'all even choose who gets in the academy? Is it called an academy?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you choose who gets in the academy?
Well, the initial part of it is we have to do a preliminary interview. That determines eligibility. Once we determine if they're eligible to go through the program, and then we start working on getting all the documentation to get them into it. Once they are in the program, so the preliminary is not that strict in the sense of you have to have a high school education, high school completion. You have to be able to pass a reading comprehension test, and then you have to be of good moral character. So agencies have the opportunity to weigh in at that point and sign off on the sponsorship form to get them into the academy, and then we pretty much take it from there and start into the training.
Okay. How long does the training last?
It is 16 weeks of training, then their 17th week is their finals, where they have to take the state police officer exam, and then there's a physical exam or physical obstacle course that they have to participate in and complete to complete the course. So it's a total of 17 weeks. Graduation makes it 18 weeks.
And it's an all-day, like how long a day is the training?
It is very long days. They get there at 6:30 in the morning. They usually leave about 6:30 in the evenings, 5 days a week. There are some Saturdays that they have to come in. So we do some weekend training. So it's a total of 16 weeks, 5 days a week of those long days that they are there. So it's pretty tough on them. It's rigorous training.
When I got there for the interview, the panel interview, I was struck. I had no idea how long their days had been. And when they started referencing them, I just thought, wow, they must be exhausted. Yeah. And it is a very rigorous training. I think one of the things that happens in our culture is when something goes wrong and someone does something wrong, we conclude that everything in that area is wrong. And I certainly believe that there is bias and racism and all that. So I'm not saying that that doesn't happen. Right. But I think you bring a unique perspective because you are African American and a police officer. And, you know, there are crazy preachers out there. There are preachers that have done, you know, very unethical things sexually, with money. And just because one or two preachers do some really, or more than one or two, but preachers do whacked out things does not make all preachers bad. And I think we need to remember that too, that just because one police officer, well, not one, I'm sorry, I'm rambling, but, you know, just because police officers, some, do heinous things and kill people, not all police officers are bad. Right. And it is, and I want us to keep talking about it, it is a very rigorous process that you put the cadets through. And one of the things that struck me that day initially was you had them introduce themselves to us, the panel. And first of all, if they did not speak with clarity and directness, y'all made them do it again. And you made them stand up, and like I would have been in tears in the first like 5 seconds of my time, because you also, I thought it was really cool because it showed that this was not a cakewalk. You know, becoming a police officer cities or towns don't just like go to Walmart and say, oh, I think I want the strawberry cupcake and the vanilla cupcake. This just looks all nice and fluffy. Just let me go pick some people. It is hard, and you put them through a rigorous process. You had names for them,
yes.
and it would be like I imagine there's lots of names that mine could be, but what would you name me? Actually, I'm just gonna ask you.
Ooh, that's kind of a.
And it's okay to be honest.
I can't think of one right offhand. And when we name them, it's something that they give us to work with. Maybe a TV show or something that they like to watch, or a favorite activity, or if they're a pet person, or different names that come out there. And the whole purpose behind it is to originally see how they adjust to being called the name, because on the streets as a police officer you get called all kinds of names, but we want to see how they adjust to it. Then they adapt a name or adopt a name, become used to it, and it's kind of a fun thing.
It was really fun. Like at first I was like, oh my gosh, they just called them that. And then, the cadets would smile. And I think I even asked, so why do y'all have these names in the panel? I think you would name me Cadet Talks a Lot. That's what.
That came to mind at one point, but I really didn't want to say it. But,
Everybody watching knows it's true, so it's okay if you say that. And it gives me the idea that I should name the West staff. Like, I think and I don't think Lindsay and Josh and Dawn like that very much, but, we need tougher skin. So anyway, so go back to telling us about, like, what you teach during the training, and I want us to hear what Stan said. I mean, think about it: 5 days a week, 12 to 13 hours a day, sometimes 6 days a week for how many weeks?
16 weeks of training, 17 weeks total with the final.
That's a lot. I mean, that's hard. That's hardcore. So what are some of the things that you all work on as they're in school?
Well, initially coming in, like I've got a group that starts here in about a month or so. The first thing I want to get across to them is why they're there as police officers. So initially up front, it's always going to be ethics. Doing what's right morally, what's right for the people and right for the officers and the departments that they represent. Here lately, we've had to push that a lot more because we have a different generation that's coming in and have different views of what law enforcement is. So we had to put a lot more emphasis on ethics. And then from ethics, it's about physical fitness, being in shape to be able to do the job. Because the one thing that we don't like to see, and one of my instructors in particular does not like to see, are officers that are out of shape. And because they're out of shape, the first resource they go to when there's an elevated conflict is that service weapon. We don't like to see that. We like to see them be able to talk. So the other thing is communication, IPC skills, how well they communicate with people. Can they have conversations? We work on that early on in the training. The big three are communications, physical fitness, and their ethics. And then we get into the laws. They come to understand the law, policies, whether they are agency policies, which we can't teach agency policies, but we can enlighten them to different ways that agencies view policies. The laws of the state, of the United States, we go over all that, try to make sure they understand that fully. And then officer safety. Officer safety is a big one. They understand that. At the end of the day, any encounters you come in or a part of, you want everyone to leave that encounter safely, whether it's the officer or the suspect you're dealing with, the victim or whoever it may be. So we work on the safety aspect of it with the officer safety. And then there's quite a few more subjects in there. They are taught 35 different subjects or present 35 different subjects during the course. And within that period of time, 16 weeks, there's a lot of information that's presented to them. It comes at them very fast, and we do our best to make sure that they understand it and are ready to put it into application when they leave the academy. But it's very tough, and comprehension, and then they have to take tests on each one of these subjects, and some of them have scenarios that we put to it, and they're evaluated on how they perform in the scenarios, which is another way of getting information about their character and their attitude when they're operating in pressure-type situations. So it's a lot more than what people would think when you're going to a police academy.
Yeah, you said something I'd never thought about before, the physical fitness aspect, that when you aren't physically
Right.
fit, there's a tendency to rely on what was the word you used? Weapon or
Your service weapon,
your
which is
service weapon.
your pistol, automatic weapon, gun, however you want to call it. So our thing is to get them to understand that there's other levels of physical force other than lethal or deadly force, but that is absolutely an option. But there, if you can talk to people, conversations, de-escalate situations, maybe a different approach. And then certainly if it goes to a physical altercation, we want them to be physically ready for that altercation and not just bypass the part of maybe going hands-on with someone as opposed to going directly to the service weapon.
All right. I want to say, too, Stan and I have been friends, gosh, I don't know how many years.
It's, quite a few years.
Quite a few, yeah. So we had some really high-level questions that I was going to ask Stan this morning, but a lot of what we're talking about right now is totally unscripted, so I want you to know that. Stan, this is an unscripted question. Just because I am ignorant around police policy and agency policies and that kind of thing, when is it okay, or when are cadets taught to pull a weapon?
Okay, so, and this is straight across North Carolina, possibly in the United States. I'm not saying every state has it this way, but it is when you have to use it as a lethal weapon to defend yourself or a third party against the imminent threat of death or injury by way of a lethal weapon. And don't get it confused, because lethal weapons vary in all shapes and forms. Obviously, a firearm is a lethal weapon, but so can a baseball bat be, even though it's not used or designed for that purpose. If someone's swinging a baseball bat at someone with the intent of causing serious injury or death, it becomes a lethal weapon. So officers are taught that, it is, we go to lethal when it is for that purpose and it is an imminent threat of injury or death.
And I guess imminent threat is interpreted differently.
That can be the issue, is the interpretation of imminent threat or the use of.
Have you ever been scared when you were serving?
I've never really actually been scared. There have been times when my anxiety levels were elevated, and I've been in a situation where there was an officer shootout, and that will definitely make you think as you're going to that call or responding to the call about what possibilities could be. When you strap on that duty belt as a police officer and you go out on patrol, you know that any given day, things could go really south or really bad really quick. And this particular day, it just happened to be that way. It was a normal day, a Christmas day actually, when all this started up. And, we got a call for assisting officers really quick, which is a help me quick call. And going there, I'm steady thinking about I may have to use my service weapon in this situation. When I got there, I had to draw my service weapon. Fortunately for me, I never had to use it, but I was prepared to. And things change in your mind. So some people get nervous, they get scared, they overreact, the pressure gets to them. Me, it was more euphoric. It's like this wasn't really happening, almost like an out-of-body experience going through all the things that took place that particular day during that incident. But I wouldn't say scared, but yeah, definitely elevated anxiety levels.
What do you all do to teach about implicit bias and prejudice in police training?
Well, starting out, we because my cadets come in, they always ask me, Sergeant Moore, and they do call me Sergeant Moore, what are your expectations of us in the academy? And the first thing I always tell them, because I want them to start really meditating on this, is that you come in here with the right attitude to do the right thing. And you talked about last week, I think, with Donna, with great power. Well, for us, is with authority comes great responsibility, and that responsibility inherits, accountability on your part to do what is right, what is morally right for yourself and everyone else that you come into contact with. So what we do is we try to get that point across to them originally. That's the very first thing, and then we build from there with the ethics. Ethics, I say again, is a big thing. Every lesson that they have has some type of ethical dilemma attached to it. And we start doing a character assessment or evaluation on them at that point as well. And I tell them that they are getting evaluated the whole entire time from day one when we have that discussion all the way through the academy. And I get an opportunity to look at their character. Can we develop that character, their character that they brought to the BLET, into the character of a well-performing professional law enforcement officer that has in mind to do what is right.
Do you have a code of ethics?
Yes, we do. And that code of ethics is one of the first things, and I'm glad you brought that up, that we make them learn and recite. Now, some of them want to do it just to please me and say, hey, Sergeant Moore, I know the words, I can recite it. But that's not the intent. The intent is to know the words and understand the words within that law enforcement officer's code of ethics. So from day one, they recite it. Every morning, they say it prior to us starting class. And they get to where they can easily recite the words. Throughout the course, I'm hoping that they come to understand what those words mean, because that code of ethics, it means a lot to me, an absolute guideline for me to do what is right based on law enforcement. There are so many other officers out there that code of ethics means so much to, and I want it to mean the same to them, and I want it to be a guideline for them as they go out and become police officers.
Do you ever fail cadets? Do they ever not pass?
We do. We have different reasons that people may fail out of the course. One of the main ones that I have authority to do is to write them out for failure to adapt. Failure to adapt means that their character does not fit what we're looking for in law enforcement. As badly as they may want to do it, the character just doesn't fit. And that's a determination on my part. It's not really so much subjective as some people would think, but there are things that I see within that cadet's character and attitude based on character assessments and evaluations that we do that may put them out. Now, here's the thing. It doesn't happen right away. We give them every opportunity to prove to us that they can step up and do some of the things that we're pointing out or deficiencies that they need to work on. Especially when you get someone that has really poor IPC skills, communication skills, we want to work with that, because that may not be a deciding factor or defining factor as far as law enforcement character. But when they just don't have the right attitude, or they're just going in there to just impose their authority on people, sometimes you can see these things, but it is a long process. They're not immediately put out. If someone's put out of the academy for failure to adapt, I would say they've probably been there well over half the academy, and we've had several talks about ways they could improve or give us confidence that they are going to go out and be good professional law enforcement officers.
The interview panel day that I was there, it was a very intense 3 hours. I mean, it went until noon.
Right.
And there were two different situations that struck me where a cadet was asked a question and they got flustered, which is easy to do in a situation like that. And one cadet cried, and you all treated that cadet with such respect, but you also didn't back down.
Right.
And I wish everybody could sit in on one of those panels and see the job that our friends at CPCC do for law enforcement training, because it was humbling and it made me appreciate our law enforcement officers. Because like you said, I mean, you grew up not liking the police. It's one profession, that and I think dentist. You know, nobody really wants to like, oh yes, today I get to go to the dentist. I think when we see law enforcement officers, it's not, oh good. There are blue lights coming behind me right now. You know, this is a great opportunity for me. So I think you carry a heavy burden, and it's got to be tough. And so on behalf of West, we appreciate what you do. What are you all doing to address the racism and the implicit bias? Will you speak to that specifically?
Yeah, and like I was saying, for us in the BLET, we're starting it early, and we go over these things with them, and we first out the gate to get them to understand that we all have biases, whether they're racial or not. We all have biases. So the very beginning of it is just get them to understand the definition of the word bias, which is a preference. You know, if you were an athlete in school and there were people that weren't athletes, you stuck with the athletic group and all this stuff, but you may have discriminated against the ones that weren't. So we start at the very basic, just getting them to understand it, and then how it can be a hidden, which is your implicit bias, that they may have based on race or culture or sexual orientation, just different things out there that may play into some of the decisions that they make. So we work on that early on and carry it through the BLET. And I'm hoping that all police academies are doing the same. I can't say for sure, but I'm hoping that they are. Once they become law enforcement officers, they're offering the training to them, even IPC skills, because they leave out there with relatively good IPC skills, but we want them to be really good communicators, be able to have conversations with people in the community. And then de-escalating training, we do quite a bit of that, and it's become one of the things that we know is quite a need for law enforcement officers. And then the implicit bias training. A lot of agencies have had their officers take the implicit association test, and they found out a lot about themselves, including me, when I took that test. But it's good for me because it gave me something to think about, meditate on, and it's the same with them. We want them to be able to take away from the training that we do, meditate on it, and figure out if it applies to them or if there's ways that it can benefit them or help them in their everyday job. So training is big. A lot of people say not so much, but I think so. The worst enemy of training for law enforcement is that it may not be well received by the officers. If we get every officer to go in there with the enthusiasm of learning something or taking something away from the training, it'd be much better. But a lot of police officers, just when it comes to training, it's like the dentist, going to the dentist and pulling teeth. You have to get them to buy into that. It's important, and it's there for a reason.
Yeah. So I think you just pointed out something to us that is brilliant. You talk about bias, and bias means preference.
Right.
And we all have
Yes.
preferences, and that is so true. Like, I mean, do you want chicken or do you
Right.
want steak? We all have
Exactly.
preferences, and they run deep, and they run along ethnocentric
Right.
categories like gender and race and wealth and sexuality. I mean, everybody has preferences.
Right.
And none of us want to say we're prejudiced, right? Like, none of us want to own, oh, I've got prejudice. But we do have bias. And I think one of the things, Tanae McClain goes to West, and I know Mooresville Graded Schools did it, and I'm sure other school systems are doing it as well, implicit bias training
Right.
with the educators. And I think that's really important. So this is another unscripted question, and
Okay.
I'm going to apologize before I ask
I'm
it.
fine.
You talk about, attitude and all that. How do situations like the one with George Floyd happen then? Because that was pretty obvious. Well, very obvious, in my opinion. How does that happen?
Well, for me, and this is obviously by way of opinion, because with these situations, I try to stay neutral as far as opinions from African-American standpoint to law enforcement standpoint. But I think it goes back to conversations and understanding people and knowing things about people. That is the bottom line. Until we can all get together and have conversations and start to understand each other better, things like this are going to crop up, hopefully not as often as they have here lately. But you have to understand people, know people. Another thing that we do teach our cadets is empathy. When you go to a call or a situation, put yourself in that person's shoes. Don't get out there and just think that they have done something criminal or civil or it's against someone. Put yourself in their shoes. Try to understand the reason why you are there for that situation, the crisis center of that call that you are there for. So when you look at things like the George Floyd incident stuff, I think it was a serious misunderstanding there. I think it's a misunderstanding of power and authority. It's a misunderstanding of people's behavior, whether it be the officer or the person that they were dealing with. And these misunderstandings are going to continue, like I say, unless we can go outside of the realm and do what is uncomfortable for us and have conversations. But I look at that one as one of those things that could have been avoided by way of words, talking, understanding someone, and the dialogue that was exchanged between the two primaries in that situation.
And what Stan's saying is not just lip service.
Right.
I remember you saying that in that panel that day, the first thing you've got to do is put yourself in that person's shoes
Right.
and not make assumptions. And that's powerful. So what do you think reform looks like for us right now with police?
I think reform is going to go back to, again, looking at the training that we do with the police officers starting from day one when they are in a police academy. I think another part of that is going to be, I think more academies are going to have to start doing these character assessments and continue the evaluation on the person throughout the academy. And if that person does not live up to the standards that are expected of a law enforcement officer, you have to cut ties with them. Otherwise, you're just putting them out in the community, and it's going to create problems within the community. So I think the assessment part of it is going to become important. Even past when they graduate the academy, continue to assess them, holding police officers accountable for their actions. I think that's going to be really big. You know, some police officers over the years, and I know this to happen, being in law enforcement, haven't been reprimanded the way that I think they should have based on their behavior or, you know, some of the actions that they have taken. So I think that's going to be big in reform. And again, the training dealing with de-escalation, community engagement, oh, that is so big. If we just could get officers to buy into going into the communities and not waiting for the community to come to them. Because that's part of our service, is to get out in that community, let them know that we're serving them and we're a part of that community. But so many officers are reluctant to go into the community and, you know, do activities or engage with the community. They would rather wait for the community to come to them. So that's just some of the ideas as far as reform goes. If we could start looking at that and getting it in place and just build from there.
That's actually how you and I got to be friends, now that I think about it. And you introduced me to another police
Right.
officer that is your friend because of the Back to School Bash
Right.
that West was instrumental in founding. And, you know, we have, 5,000 people come. This year it's going to be different, spread over 4 days, et cetera. But we still expect to serve 5,000 to 6,000 people
Right.
this year. And the law enforcement would come to the bash and not just stand there in a little huddle, but would be out talking to the kids and their families and building those relationships.
Right.
And that is essential. How do you feel about defunding police?
That I'm against, and I'll tell you why. If you start defunding police, you're going to start taking away those opportunities for the training and things that they need, or disbanding police, as some people have said, and that definitely would not be good. We need law enforcement. We need good law enforcement officers. That's a necessity. It's an unfortunate necessity in certain situations, but it is a necessity. So I'm totally against disbanding or defunding law enforcement or the training that we do or the support that law enforcement gets. I think it's going to create more problems than any type of solution.
I personally don't think defunding or disbanding police is a good idea. I
Right.
mean, that does not strike me as a good idea.
No.
Last night I was in a place I probably shouldn't have been at a time I shouldn't have been, and I had some anxiety about being there at night, and I felt safe
Right.
because I knew that there was law enforcement, that I could seek help if I needed help. And that brought me solace and comfort.
Yeah.
So, again, just because bad things happen, it doesn't mean we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, to use
Right.
that analogy. I mean,
agree.
reform is important. And so, if anything, maybe this can be a catalyst for that.
Right.
Last question. How do you feel about cameras in police cars and on a police's person?
Okay. Now, for me, I'm totally for it, absolutely for it, because if you're a police officer and you're doing what you're supposed to do morally and you're acting in good faith, you should have no problem with anybody recording you, which I don't. And that's why I'm for in-car video cameras for law enforcement as well as the body cam that we wear. Now, when it started, you know, the in-car cameras for police officers was probably better received than the body cam for police officers. I think more police officers are adjusting to it, but they just felt more like it was a way of tracking them and watching what they were doing, as opposed to giving the, I guess, the community something to feel comfortable about and trust in what law enforcement officers were doing. So if any police officer out there that's doing what they're supposed to should have no problem with wearing a body camera, and I absolutely do not. Now, the technology of it I have a problem with because I'm not that good with it. But the people have helped me along the way. So once I got over that hurdle, then it's absolutely no problem for me. I would prefer it, actually, because I do want people to know what I'm doing as a police officer. I want to be transparent, as you hear a lot of police officers say. So that is a way of being transparent.
Well, it seems to me it would provide another layer of safety for everyone.
Right.
I mean, for you,
right.
you know. So if there is uncertainty around imminent threat,
right.
you know, I mean, if you've got that camera, then there
right.
you go. I mean, so to me, it just seems like it would be protection.
It is. It's good for the community, and it's good for law enforcement. So I just see it as a definite good thing or plus.
So is there anything you wanted to say that I've not talked about or we've not talked about?
Not really. I just know that you know, there's animosity between law enforcement and communities right now, and I'm encouraging every law enforcement officer along with the community to come together and have these conversations, as many conversations as you can. A lot of times it's uncomfortable for people to have a conversation. I do this jokingly with people, and I talk about the elevator syndrome is what I call it. You know, you're stuck in an elevator with a person, you don't want to say anything, they don't want to say anything. But if we get past that and we can have these conversations regardless of how painful or embarrassing or whatever you might think they are, I think we can do so much better. And I think that's going to transition over into law enforcement and community trust. So get out there and have conversations. If you pass by someone, different culture, different race, whatever, simple hello. That's a conversation. It's a very good conversation. I'm trying to get better at it. Y'all know I'm not the most talkative person, even though I'm
you are
chatting
very
today.
chatty today. I'm
I
so
think
happy.
Yeah, I think it's contagious when I'm around you. But get out and have these conversations. And if nothing else, just in passing by someone, take the opportunity to speak to them and just say hello. And we start to build from there. And hopefully, like I said, transitions into community and law enforcement and all these other things, politics and community. We just need to work on being better conversationalists.
I have lost track of time. How many years ago was it when the riots were in Charlotte and you and I did the discussion? Do you remember?
I don't know exactly. I'm thinking, yeah, it's probably about 5 or so years ago.
You said something then that West people still talk about to this day. And then we talked really mainly about race and prejudice that day. And you said, I asked you what it was like to be an African-American man in our culture. And you expressed concerns because when you're walking down the sidewalk, people will see you in their peripheral vision and just not look you in the eye. And you said, look, you want to, and I think I asked you, what can we do to make a difference in racial relations and build relationships together? And you said to a white church, you said, when you walk down the street or the sidewalk and you see someone that's different, then you look them in the eye and smile. And people still talk about that to this day. And so we need to still be doing that.
Absolutely.
And we're just so grateful that you are a part of our community and our church and our brothers and sisters at St. Paul. And you've changed us. You continue to change us. And this did feel a little bit like that elevator a few times. I was like, I don't want to ask that question, but I know I need to. And my gosh, you're so gracious. Can we pray for you right now and pray for our law enforcement and
Absolutely, I would love that.
Country? All right, let us pray. Gracious God, to whom much is given, much is required. And we all know that we have been given many things that we are called to do something with. And relationships and respect and love those things are at the forefront of who we are called to do and be. Jesus told us that he came to give us a new commandment, and it was to love one another as you have loved us. teach us to do that regardless of skin color. Thank you for Stan. Thank you for his honesty and his frankness and his transparency. Thank you for what the folks at CPCC and all the academies all everywhere do to help protect our safety and raise up great cadets so that they can go and put themselves in harm's way. So God, we ask that you be with law enforcement. It is a scary and difficult time. And so we ask that you be with all of our officers and you surround them and their families with this sense of peace and community. God, help us continue to seek to be a people of oneness and of justice. There is much work to be done, and we all have a responsibility in that. Help us confront our biases and let us make a difference in this world. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Amen. Take a listen to the song, then we'll give away Alexa. See Stan walking down the street take a vertical jump because Stan has the opportunity of height, which I do not have. So jump up and look him in the eye and smile. Those are the things that will make a difference in small things that make a huge difference. So Stan's going to draw for our Alexa this morning. So just pick a name, Stan.
Okay, let's see here.
And thank you to the leader who sent me my cadet name, Cadet Motormouth. I did see that in a text, so thank you very much. The winner of the, what's it called, Alexa today is Ramona Teague. So Ramona, congratulations. We're so happy for you that you have won an Alexa. If you have questions for Sam, we're going to go do Talk Back Live now in 30 seconds, so send in your questions.